Welcome back to episode 17, part 2 of the 755 Followed Me Home project. Since it's the weekend, I can't have the injectors checked until Monday and next week. So in the meantime, what I'm going to do is check on a few other things, beginning with the exhaust manifold and the muffler. When we left episode 17, a different injection pump had been installed. The engine started, it rocked and rolled, and after a short time expired. Prior to this, the initial start came with smoke coming from around the muffler. My first thought was that the exhaust to manifold gasket was leaking. Checked the gasket and the flange. Doesn't look like there's anything that's blown by there. But with no historical information to go on, there may also be an obstruction in the muffler and a seam was ruptured. Let's start there. I'm going to check and see if there's any leaks in this muffler. Nope, she's good. So far it doesn't look like there's anything wrong there. So I think I'm going to turn my attention to the compression test and see if there's any internal problems. The John Deere manual states that compression pressures should be around 355 pounds after 3 seconds, with no more than 71 pounds difference between cylinders. This test determined that number 1 had 525 pounds after 6 seconds. Number 2 had 525 pounds at 6 seconds. And number 3 had 515 pounds at 6 seconds. At 3 seconds, number 1 had 430 pounds. Number 2 had 400 pounds. And number 3 can't be read, but looking at the bottom of the needle, it appears consistent with the other two. Well, now we come to a major issue that is facing anyone trying to resurrect an old tractor: bad fuel. I don't have video of the inspection, but the shop found that the injection pump rack was free and all plungers were pumping. Initially, the number 2 nozzle valve was stuck until pressure was increased during the test. The number 1 injector tested fine, and the valve in number 3 had to be pulled out of the injector with pliers. Back in the 70s, 80s, 90s, and even in the 2000s, we could leave diesel fuel in a tractor for indefinite periods of time, or even in the fuel barrels, and never have any problem with it. But not now. Dave told me that back in 2010 or so, refiners changed their formulation in the way they were making diesel fuel. Had something to do with the additives. Moving ahead to when COVID hit, there was that period of time when diesel fuel was not being consumed as fast through the trucks, and a lot of the later fuel was left in barrels just around the country. He said following that, probably in 2022, they had a slew of injection pumps at all of their places that people were having sticking problems, and they didn't put it together at the time. But since then, they found that diesel fuel has a shelf life of maybe 6 months to 12 months. And so what I'm going to do is show you what I finally ran into here. I expected to have a problem with the injection pump off of the blind date. When I got that tractor and started inspecting it, I found that the fuel smelled really bad. It had an odd color to it and a consistency. It smelled like turpentine. And I figured that that was in the system. But because this laboratory environment that I've kind of created here with these tractors, I went ahead and left that engine together to just see what would happen. As an example of what the guys that are going out into the country and digging out old tractors and dragging them out of the weeds can run into when they're trying to see if they can get them to start. Now here's some of the fuel out of the blind date tank. I like that reddish color. Just before I ended up cleaning out all of this out of the blind date. This is what came out of the bottom of the tank. And this is what came out of the overbought 855 down on the bottom. Here's a day after I cleaned out the tanks. If you notice this material that is still gummy down here in the bottom on this one, and it's even stuck onto the funnel. And here's the fuel sending unit out of the blind date tank, covered with a whole sticky layer of varnish. Even the level won't move. So this is the kind of material that was probably lodged in that injection pump that was just waiting to come out and plug an injector. So the next thing for me to do is to thoroughly clean out the fuel system and try the startup again. Okay, first thing I'm going to do, I've had a bunch of that super clean in the tank, been soaking it, it's biodegradable, see what's coming out. And here's another thing we can talk about. You'll hear this. Well, this is the strainer that was retrieved out of the bottom of the tank. Notice that varnish that's accumulated around here. Well, here we are with a fuel tank out of a 755, the front tank. Could be a 655. A lot of people have had trouble with them thinking that they're running out of fuel when they still have fuel on their gauge. Well, that happened to me years ago. And here's what we find out. Here's the front of the tank. Here's the sending unit. It rides in here like that. And then there's the strainer that's in the bottom. The hose will deteriorate over time to where the strainer just drops off of the end and it rides around in the bottom of the tank. So what I found on this 755, the strainer fell out of the tank when I drained it, but the previous owner, having a problem with it, had put this piece of hose on the bottom that laid clear down in the bottom of the tank. And it has a coating, this kind of a rust-colored material on there, which has come from the fuel. It's up on the top of it. The bottom of the hose doesn't have any, but it's laying on the top. So sediment has fallen down this way onto that hose. Here's a closer shot of that material that has accumulated on the top of the hose. And there on the bottom, there's not much of an evidence. I see there's a little bit of dirt there on the bottom, but with this laying down in the bottom of the tank, any kind of dirt or contamination is going to get in here and then go up and plug your fuel filter. While the tank is still draining and drying, I checked the sending unit to see if it was working. As you can see, it isn't providing an ascending and descending reading, so it'll need to be replaced. Note that next to it is an aftermarket unit that I'll be modifying to work as a replacement for the OEM sender, but that process will be covered in an upcoming extra. So to fix the problem with the fuel sending unit and keep in the spirit of making sure this tractor is as good as I can make it, I picked up a AM 102058 John Deere official fuel sending unit. $201 and some change. Let's see what it comes with. Isn't this neat? It came in a box with 4 lids. It comes with the bent over tubing like for the 855. Doesn't look like it comes with a strainer. That's good, I have one. And it has a different type of float. Doesn't look like $201 to me. So here's an update on the strainer. It's been soaking in super clean. Looking pretty good. It's a little touchy to put it in. As you see, this doesn't quite want to fit in the hole. So what you'll need to do is squeeze this together until it'll fit through the hole. I cut the tubing so that the bottom of the pickup tube is an inch off the bottom of the tank. You squeeze that little guy over there. This rod that holds the float is a little longer and of a different design than the stock. And to confirm, the outboard pipe is the one that is for the fuel pickup line. This line is a little bit longer from the old pickup tube, but it still fits just fine. On top of the VDO gauge, there's a G indicating that this inboard connection is the ground, and what I've been able to do is to pull back some of this insulation and confirm that the line that I have here indicated with some black on it is in fact the ground. The other one is the information positive. To help keep this latest diesel fuel a little more fresh, my guy recommends putting in some Lucas. They're calling it an upper cylinder lubricant for injectors and fuel conditioners. You want about, I think it calls for 3 ounces for 10 gallons. So I'm going to put about 2 ounces. A good way to do that is take a chainsaw oil can, which is 2.5 ounces, and fill it sort of partway full. You can't put too much in. The original pump wouldn't draw enough fuel to get into the system, and this is what it did. Notice also that it's just got the one wire and one connector in the plug. So here are the players. This is the original pump with the one single connector. The ground comes back underneath a clamp here underneath the frame. While I've got it upside down, note that the bolt pattern works the same. I don't know if you can see that. So the plan is to take the ground wire out of this socket, solder it onto this lug, and then it will go underneath the mounting bolt to ground. This original pump, of course, has this bypass line. I suppose if the diaphragm ruptures, then extra fuel will come out this way. The replacement, the Yanmar pump, does not have that feature. Okay, we'll see what that new fuel pump does. We're going to watch here, see if we get fuel to come up to this little filter. That's a lot better. We got pressure. That's a big improvement there. So now we have some fuel pressure. Okay, we're going to torque all three to 13 foot-pounds. We'll double check the injectors at 37 foot-pounds. You have to be really careful when you're putting things like these nuts on, because they can have some loose paint unless you've cleaned them. If you notice, right down in here is a piece of paint. I'm moving it around a little bit so you can see it. That can go down into the injector nozzle. So you want to make sure that you keep everything clean. If everything will work, so far so good. I'm going to take some, I guess this is carbon choke cleaner. I'm just going to blast it through here and see if we got anything in that line. Well, I went ahead and primed it. Got fuel coming to all three injectors. So we're going to tighten them down. That number 3 is a little hard to get to without the right wrench. In review, following the video start, the tractor was moved outside and exercised a bit to see if the engine would either smooth out or blow up. Neither occurred. I believe there were 3 issues that plagued starting of the blind date engine in the overbought 755 tractor. The first and major issue was residue in the really bad fuel that came in the blind date. Here's the stuff in the blind date fuel tank. Residual contaminated fuel in the injection pump fouled the number 3 injector almost immediately. Note how the new injector still appears new after it was washed clean with fuel. Dave said the knock probably came from this cylinder and was also the source of the white smoke from unburned fuel. Number 2 was probably trying to clear, but was sticking intermittently. And number 1 escaped and was going it alone. Next was the smoke rising from the area of the head and muffler. While reviewing other videos, I noticed this wiggle from the number 3 glow plug. Were they not tightened and torqued? Again, from the archives, this sequence was recorded shortly before the first start. It shows the glow plugs were tightened but not torqued. Again, it's not the engine, it's me. Lastly, the fuel lift pump quit working somewhere along the way, maybe from residue in the overbought 755 tank. But it was reported as running in 2022. Well, I don't mind telling y'all, I have a little anxiety about trying to start it again. But there's no reason why I can't. By the way, I've left the exhaust pipe off for right now. I just want to see if she's going to run. So, let's turn it on. Glow plugs. Here we go. runs. Thank you very much. I idled it a little while. I took the starter solenoid, the fuel shutoff out, took this plate off, ran it, and as I moved the rack, everything was fine, and it started to run a little better. So here's after just a moment of letting it work some air out. Let's see what it'll do better now. So it just took a little while to get the air purged out of the pump and the system. So there's where we are at the moment, and I'm very encouraged. So I think we're good. The idle might be a little bit slow. Again, this is the first time I've heard this engine run with this pump. This is the old blind date motor, and I think we're getting it ready to go. Thanks for watching. Well, I've got some good news and I've got some bad news. Motor runs great. Transmission shifts fine. The pedals work great. Steering is great. Now the motor's got to come out.